The first thing you notice when you move back to your hometown is the smell. For me, it was the specific scent of damp soil, pine needles, and the faint, metallic tang of the old railway tracks that cut through the north end of town. It was the smell of my childhood, of a life I thought I'd left behind for good. I'd traded the sterile, air-conditioned world of corporate architecture in the city for the scent of sawdust and machine oil in the hardware store. My father and his father had run Miller's Hardware. The sign outside was faded, the red paint chipped and weathered by decades of Harmony Creek winters. But it was real. It was mine. And after the implosion of my marriage, real was something I desperately needed. My life in the city had been a high-rise mirage. A beautiful wife, Melissa, a corner office, a German sedan. It looked perfect from the outside, but on the inside, it was hollow. The divorce stripped it all away, layer by painful layer, until all that was left was me. And Carter. You can't tell this story without Carter. Carter was the demolition ball that swung through my life. He was a developer, the kind of man who saw a 100-year-old oak tree and only calculated its value as lumber. He was all sharp suits, blinding white teeth, and the predatory stillness of a shark that knows it's the biggest thing in the water. Melissa met him at a charity gala. I was too busy working to attend. 6 months later, my life was a smoldering crater, and he was standing in the middle of it, holding her hand. I didn't fight. What was the point? She was dazzled by his money, his ambition, his utter ruthlessness, things I could never be. So I packed up what was left of my dignity, sold my half of our sterile minimalist condo, and came home. My dad had passed a few years prior, and the hardware store had been sitting dormant, a dusty time capsule waiting for a purpose. I guess we were both waiting for a purpose. Reopening it felt right. Measuring out lengths of chain, mixing the perfect shade of eggshell paint for Mrs. Gable's porch, offering advice on how to fix a leaky faucet. It was tangible. It was honest work. It was a world away from Carter's business of raising history, to make way for another chain pharmacy, with a parking lot the size of a football field. For 2 years, I kept my head down. I grieved my marriage, my old life, and tried to find peace in the quiet rhythms of Harmony Creek. But Carter's shadow was long. It had started to fall over my hometown even before I moved back. He'd seen what I saw, a quiet, beautiful town full of historic properties. But he didn't see charm. He saw opportunity. He saw undervalued assets. He started buying up old buildings on Main Street, promising revitalization. What he delivered were soulless, beige strip malls. The old cinema, where I'd had my first date, became a discount mattress store. The beloved town bakery, run by the same family for 3 generations, was bulldozed for a fast food joint. And the town council, they ate it up. They were simple people, mostly, unprepared for a predator like Carter. He'd waltz into meetings with glossy presentations, and talk about tax revenues and job creation. He flattered them, took them out for expensive dinners, and made them feel like they were finally bringing Harmony Creek into the 21st century. They were so blinded by the shine of his money, they couldn't see. He was systematically gutting the town's soul. I'd watch it happen, a knot of quiet rage tightening in my stomach, but I'd say nothing. It wasn't my fight. I was just the quiet guy running the hardware store, the guy who'd failed in the big city and slunk back home. My opinion didn't matter. That all changed last Tuesday. It was a crisp autumn morning, and I was sweeping the front stoop of the store when I saw the flyer tacked to the community notice board. It was printed on glossy paper, a stark contrast to the usual bake sale and lost cat notices. A photo of Carter, smiling that predatory smile, stood next to the mayor. The headline read, "A new vision for Harmony Creek, modern retail pavilion and plaza." I read the words, and the air went out of my lungs. They weren't just proposing another strip mall. They were proposing it for the land currently occupied by Miller Park. Not just any park. The oldest park in town. The park that was donated to the town by my great-grandfather, Thomas Miller, the man who founded the hardware store and helped build Harmony Creek from the ground up. It was where I'd scraped my knees playing tag, where my dad taught me to throw a baseball, where the town held its 4th of July picnics. It was named after my family. And Carter, my ex-wife's new husband, the man who had taken everything from me, was going to tear it down and pave over it. He was going to erase the last most significant piece of my family's legacy. A town hall meeting was scheduled for the following week. The flyer said it was a formality, a final public consultation before the council unanimously approved the project. I stood there, the broom handle clenched in my fist, and felt something shift inside me. The quiet resignation I'd been living in for 2 years began to curdle, hardening into a cold, dense resolve. Harder, and the council thought this was a done deal. They saw a quiet, unused patch of green space and a reclusive hardware store owner who wouldn't make a peep. What they didn't know, what nobody in this town remembered anymore, was that I possessed something more powerful than all of Carter's money and all the council's flimsy authority. Tucked away in a dusty trunk in my attic was the original town charter, signed by my great-grandfather and the town's other founding members. And within that aging, forgotten document was a little-known provision, a legacy clause, written specifically to protect the lands he donated. It gave his direct descendants, it gave me final, inalienable veto power over the use of any public land he had gifted to the town. And I was about to make my first public appearance in years. It wasn't about revenge, not at first. But standing there, staring at Carter's smug face on that flyer, I felt a grim satisfaction. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. The flyer felt like a physical weight in my hand as I walked back into the store. The little bell above the door chimed, a sound that usually comforted me, but now it sounded like an alarm. I locked the door, flipping the sign to closed even though it was barely 10 in the morning. I needed to be alone. The store was my sanctuary, a fortress of solitude built from shelves of screws, buckets of paint, and the comforting clutter of 100 years of business. But now it felt like the walls were closing in. The weight in my hand became a weight in my chest, a crushing pressure that made it hard to breathe. Miller Park. It was more than just a name, more than just a plot of land. It was a living archive of my family's history, and my own. I walked back to the small, cluttered office at the rear of the store, the same office where my father and grandfather had tallied their books and drank their morning coffee. On the wall hung a faded, sepia-toned photograph of my great-grandfather, Thomas Miller, standing in front of this very store. He was a stern-looking man, with a formidable mustache and eyes that seemed to hold a deep, unwavering certainty. He wasn't smiling. Men like him didn't smile for photographs. They built things. They laid foundations. They created legacies. And I, his great-grandson, had retreated into the legacy he'd built, hiding from the world. I had let his name, our name, become synonymous with the quiet guy who couldn't keep his wife, the man who ran the dusty old hardware store on the corner. The news about the park wasn't just an attack on a public space. It felt like a deeply personal violation, a final, definitive desecration of everything my family stood for. And it was being orchestrated by Carter. The universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. I sank into the old, creaky wooden chair behind the desk, the flyer crinkling in my fist. My mind, against my will, flashed back to the last time I'd seen Carter. It was in a lawyer's office, the air thick with unspoken animosity. Melissa sat between us, looking pale and uncomfortable, refusing to meet my eyes. I was there to sign the final papers, the documents that would legally sever our 10-year history. Carter was there because he couldn't resist the opportunity to gloat. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car, and he watched me with an expression of bored pity, as if I were a slightly pathetic stray he'd found on his doorstep. As I pushed the signed papers across the polished mahogany table, he leaned forward slightly, a smirk playing on his lips. "No hard feelings, Greg," he said, his voice a low, condescending purr. "It's just business. Some people build things, and some people, well, they get left behind. It's the nature of progress." He looked around the lawyer's opulent office, then his gaze met mine, cold and dismissive. "You're a man of the past, content to play with your nuts and bolts in that forgotten little town. Melissa needs a future." Each word was a carefully aimed dart, and they had all hit their mark. I didn't say anything. I just stood up, nodded to my lawyer, and walked out. What could I have said? He was right. I had lost. He had won. He'd taken my wife, my life, and now he was coming for my home. He wasn't just building a strip mall. He was proving his point, over and over again, that he was the future, and I was the past. That his world of disposable consumerism was superior to my world of enduring quality. That tearing something down was more valuable than preserving it. I smoothed the crumpled flyer on the desk, my knuckles white. The initial shock was beginning to recede, replaced by a slow-burning anger that felt unfamiliar and yet deeply primal. It was the same feeling I'd had as a kid, when a bully pushed me down on the playground at Miller Park. The helplessness, the shame, and then the defiant spark that said, "No more." My childhood in Harmony Creek was idyllic in the way that only small-town childhoods can be. Miller Park was our kingdom. We built forts in the thicket of ancient pine trees at its edge, played epic games of capture the flag across its rolling lawns, and fished for tadpoles in the creek that babbled along its western border. There was a massive gnarled oak tree in the center, its branches low enough for even the smallest kids to climb. We called it the Council Oak. My dad told me that's where my great-grandfather and the other founders had met to plan the town, sitting on felled logs before a single street was even paved. Whether it was true or not didn't matter. It was part of the town's mythology, our mythology. To tear it down would be like ripping the heart out of Harmony Creek. I thought about Carter's words again. A man of the past. He meant it as an insult, a way to diminish me. But as I sat there, in the quiet solitude of my family's store, surrounded by the ghosts of my ancestors, I started to see it differently. Maybe the past wasn't something to be ashamed of. Maybe it was a source of strength. Maybe the past was a weapon. That's when I remembered. It wasn't a sudden bolt of lightning, but a slow dawning realization, like the sun rising on a foggy morning. It was a memory of my grandfather, a story he used to tell me when I was a boy, sitting on his lap in this very office. He'd talk about his father, Thomas, and the founding of the town. He called them men of foresight. He told me how they hadn't just planned for the next year, but for the next 100 years. And he told me about the charter. He said Thomas was a stubborn man who didn't fully trust politicians, even the ones he called friends. He believed that some things, like the land he was giving to the people, needed to be protected forever. He put a lock on it. "Greggy," my grandfather had said, his voice a low rumble, "a special lock that only a miller can turn." At the time, I thought it was just a story, a grand metaphor to make a little boy feel important. But what if it wasn't? What if it was real? The thought sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through me, clearing the fog of my despair. I pushed back from the desk, my movements suddenly filled with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. The breakdown was over. The self-pity was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve. Carter had come to my home, to the one place I had left, and tried to burn it to the ground. He thought he was fighting a broken man. He was about to find out he was fighting a miller. And a miller, I was beginning to remember, does not get left behind. We endure. And when we have to, we fight. The catalyst wasn't a lottery win or a sudden inheritance. It was the simple, profound realization that I was done running. I was done hiding. It was time to go up to the attic. The air in the attic was thick and still, smelling of old paper, cedar, and the dust of forgotten decades. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, layered with memories. A single bare bulb cast a weak yellow light, creating long dancing shadows that clung to the shapes of furniture draped in white sheets, like ghosts waiting for a party that would never happen. This was the attic of my childhood home, the apartment above the hardware store, where I'd grown up, and where I now lived again. Every box, every trunk was a chapter of my family's history. My history. My heart was pounding a steady, determined rhythm against my ribs. I was no longer the defeated man who had locked the store door an hour ago. I was on a mission. I was searching for a legend, a story my grandfather had told me, hoping, praying, that it was more than just a fairy tale. I moved past a stack of my mother's old romance novels, a box of my own childhood drawings, and a rusty tricycle I hadn't seen in 30 years. My target was in the far corner, tucked under the eaves, a large dark wood steamer trunk, bound with black iron straps. It was my great-grandfather's trunk. It had come with him when he first settled here, carrying all his worldly possessions. As a kid, it was a treasure chest, a pirate's bounty, a mysterious object I was never allowed to open. My grandfather kept it locked, and the key, he'd said, was for a time when it's needed. After my father passed, and I was clearing out his personal effects, I found the key. It was a heavy, ornate skeleton key, tucked into a small velvet pouch in his desk drawer with a simple handwritten tag that said, "For Greg, from Dad." I hadn't understood its significance then. I just put it in a safe place, a memento from a man I missed dearly. Now I knew. It was the key my grandfather had told me about. The key to the lock that only a miller could turn. My hands were shaking slightly as I retrieved the key from my own desk downstairs and returned to the attic. The lock on the trunk was heavy and intricate. I slid the key in. It felt stiff at first, as if reluctant to give up its secrets after so long. I applied gentle pressure, and with a deep, satisfying thunk, the lock clicked open. A shiver went down my spine. It was real. I lifted the heavy lid, and the smell of old leather and parchment washed over me. The trunk was meticulously organized. On top were bundles of letters, tied with faded ribbon. Below them, old tools of a quality you couldn't find anymore. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a protective oilcloth, was a large flat leather portfolio. My breath caught in my throat. I lifted it out. It was heavy, substantial. I untied the leather straps and opened it on the dusty floor. There it was, the original town charter of Harmony Creek. It wasn't a copy or a replica. It was the genuine article, written in elegant, looping calligraphy on thick vellum-like parchment that had yellowed with age. At the bottom were the signatures. The ink faded from black to a deep brown. Thomas Miller, John Gable, Henry O'Connell. The Founding Fathers. A real physical piece of history, lying on the floor of my attic. My eyes scanned the dense legalistic text, searching, and then I found it. About halfway down, under a section titled On Public Lands and Endowments.
It was a short, unassuming paragraph.
Be it further resolved that any and all lands gifted to the township by a founding signatory for the purpose of public use, enjoyment, and congregation shall be held in perpetual trust. The stewardship of said lands shall fall to the elected council, yet the ultimate disposition, alteration, or sale of said lands shall be subject to a final irrevocable veto by the gifting signatory or their direct, uncontested blood descendants, in perpetuity. This legacy clause is established to ensure the foundational spirit of the gift is preserved against the transient whims of temporary governance. I read it once, then a second time, then a third. A slow smile spread across my face. It was better than I could have ever imagined. Transient whims of temporary governance. My great-grandfather had seen a man like Carter coming 100 years away. He had built a firewall into the very foundations of the town. Irrevocable veto. Direct, uncontested blood descendants. That was me. I was the last Miller in Harmony Creek. The line ended with me, and the power rested with me. A giddy, triumphant laugh escaped my lips, echoing in the quiet attic. It was the first time I'd laughed like that in years. The feeling was intoxicating. I had him. I had Carter, the council, all of them. But my elation was quickly tempered by a dose of reality. This was a 100-year-old document. Would it even hold up in court? Carter would have an army of high-priced lawyers ready to tear it to shreds. I couldn't go into that town hall meeting, armed with just a piece of old paper and a triumphant smile. I needed to be sure. I needed an ally. There was only one person I could trust. I pulled out my phone, my fingers tapping the screen with newfound confidence, and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar, gravelly voice answered. Dave's Legal and Taxidermy. You kill it, he bills it. You stuff it, he stuffs it. What's the emergency? I couldn't help but chuckle. Dave Patterson, my best friend from high school, and probably the only man in Harmony Creek more cynical than I was. After a brief, spectacularly unsuccessful career as a corporate lawyer in the city, he'd returned home around the same time I did, opening a small, eccentric practice where he handled minor legal disputes for the locals and pursued his bizarre passion for taxidermy. His office was a surreal mix of law books and glassy-eyed squirrels. Dave, it's Greg, I said. There was a pause on the other end. Miller. Well, I'll be. I was about to send out a search party. I figured you'd either become a permanent part of the hardware store's foundation, or finally succumb to the fumes from the paint thinner. Funny, I said, my voice serious. Listen, I need your help. It's important. It's about Miller Park. The joking tone in Dave's voice vanished. Carter's little palace of consumerism. I saw the flyer. It's a disgrace. But what can you do? The council sold their souls for a new sewer line years ago. Maybe more than we think, I said, a hint of the thrill still in my voice. Can I come over? I have something you need to see. And Dave, don't mention this to anyone. My lips are sealed, he said, unless it involves a particularly well-preserved badger. My life is an open book of crushing boredom. Get over here. I carefully wrapped the charter back in its oilcloth, placed it in the portfolio, and left the attic, closing the door on the ghosts of the past. I was bringing the most powerful one with me. My subplot, my reconnection with Dave, was now beginning. His own family had a history with developers. 20 years ago, A different company had used eminent domain to force his parents to sell their family farm for a pittance to build a golf course that went bankrupt in 5 years. Dave had a score to settle with men like Carter, and I was about to hand him the perfect opportunity. We weren't just two forgotten sons of Harmony Creek anymore. We were about to become a very big problem. Dave's office was exactly as I remembered, a chaotic symphony of the legal and the macabre. A stoic-looking owl, with glass eyes perched on a filing cabinet, seeming to judge the stacks of manila folders that threatened to overwhelm the desk. The air smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and a faint chemical scent I associated with his hobby. Dave himself was leaning back in a leather chair that had seen better days, a pair of reading glasses perched on his nose. He was a big man, built like the linebacker he used to be in high school, with a cynical wit that he used as both a shield and a sword. He looked up as I entered, his eyes taking in the leather portfolio I was clutching to my chest like a holy relic. Well, he drawled, gesturing to the rickety chair opposite his desk. You look like a man who's either found religion or a winning lottery ticket. Given your track record, I'm guessing it's not the lottery. I ignored the jibe and sat down, placing the portfolio on his desk with a reverence that felt almost comical in these surroundings. It's better than the lottery, I said, my voice low and intense. I untied the straps and laid the charter open. Dave leaned forward, his initial smirk fading as he took in the ancient document. He slowly took off his glasses, polished them on his shirt, and put them back on, his eyes scanning the page. Is this what I think it is? He murmured, his fingers hovering over the parchment, as if afraid to touch it. The original town charter, I confirmed, signed by my great-grandfather. Dave let out a low whistle. He spent the next 10 minutes reading, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was no longer the wise-cracking cynic. He was the lawyer, the man who had graduated top of his class before the corporate world chewed him up and spit him out. He read every word, his lips moving silently. I waited, the silence in the room punctuated only by the ticking of an old grandfather clock in the corner. Finally, he leaned back, his eyes wide. He looked from the charter to me, and back again. The legacy clause, he whispered, a note of awe in his voice. I've heard of these things in old property law textbooks, but I've never seen one in the wild. It's a unicorn. A legal griffin, a freaking platypus of jurisprudence. So it's real, I pressed. It's enforceable. Enforceable. Dave let out a short, sharp laugh. Greg, this isn't just enforceable. It's an atom bomb. Town and city charters are foundational legal documents. They supersede standard municipal bylaws, modern zoning laws, council resolutions. They're all built on top of this foundation. If the foundation has a specific unbreakable rule in it, that rule stands. He tapped the paragraph with his finger. And this is about as unbreakable as it gets. Irrevocable veto. In perpetuity. My God, your great-grandfather was a suspicious old genius. A wave of relief, so powerful it almost made me dizzy, washed over me. So I can just walk into that meeting and stop it. Just like that. In theory, yes, Dave said, his expression turning serious again. But this is Carter we're talking about. He's not going to just roll over. The second you announce this, he's going to throw a team of $10,000 an hour lawyers at it. They'll try to argue it's an archaic and unenforceable relic. They'll claim it's a violation of public trust. They'll try to drown us in motions and injunctions. So what do we do? I asked, my confidence wavering slightly. We don't give them time to prepare, Dave said, a predatory glint in his own eyes now. He was in his element. This was the kind of fight he was born for. We don't leak this. We don't warn them. You walk into that town hall meeting as Greg Miller, the quiet hardware store owner. You let Carter do his song and dance. You let the council fawn all over him. You let them think they have it in the bag. Then when it's your turn to speak, you drop this on them. Cold. He stood up and began to pace the small office, weaving around a half-finished raccoon. We need to control the narrative. The beauty of this is its simplicity and its history. It's David versus Goliath. The descendant of the town founder protecting his legacy against the soulless corporate raider. The local papers will eat it up. The regional news will be all over it. Carter's power comes from his image as an unstoppable force of progress. We're going to paint him as a bully trying to desecrate a town's history. We'll make certified copies of the charter. I'll have a legal brief ready to file the moment the meeting is over, preempting any move he tries to make. The days leading up to the town hall meeting were a strange mixture of quiet anticipation and mounting tension. On Dave's advice, I went about my business as usual. I opened the store every morning, sold bags of concrete and cans of varnish, and offered friendly advice to the weekend gardeners. To the outside world, nothing had changed. But inside, I was a different person. I was carrying a secret that felt like a coiled spring in my chest. Every time a customer mentioned the new development, I would just nod and give a non-committal shrug, all the while knowing I held the power to bring the whole thing crashing down. The silence, as it turned out, was its own kind of move. Carter and the council expected opposition. They expected angry letters to the editor from the local historical society. They expected a few disgruntled citizens to grumble. What they didn't expect was silence from the one person whose family name was literally on the park sign. My lack of a reaction was, in itself, a source of confusion. It made them nervous. The first sign of their unease came 3 days before the meeting. Mayor Thompson, a man whose spine appeared to be made of jelly, waddled into my store. He browsed the aisles for a good 10 minutes, picking up tools and putting them down, before finally making his way to the counter where I was sorting washers. "Morning, Greg," he said, forcing a folksy smile. "Just looking for some wood glue." "Aisle 4, I said, not looking up. He didn't move. "Listen, Greg," he began, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "I know this Miller Park business must be a little sensitive for you. The name and all. It's a park, Mayor. It's a name," I said, my tone flat. Right, he said, sweating slightly despite the cool temperature in the store. "It's just, Carter's proposal is a real boon for this town. We're talking significant tax revenue, jobs. It's the kind of modern investment Harmony Creek needs to survive." He was reciting the lines from Carter's brochure. "Is there a point to this, Mayor?" I asked, finally meeting his gaze. He flinched. "Well, I just wanted to gauge your feelings. We wouldn't want any unpleasantness at the meeting on Tuesday. We're hoping for a smooth, unified front, to show potential future investors that Harmony Creek is open for business." "I see," I said. "And what does Mr. Carter think?" "Carter." The mayor looked flustered. "He's a very generous man. In fact, he was saying he'd be willing to make a sizable donation to the town's historical society, as a gesture of goodwill, maybe even name the new fountain in the plaza after your great-grandfather." The sheer naked cynicism of it was breathtaking.
"You say tons of funds," with a plaque.
The anger I felt was cold and sharp.
I had to physically restrain myself from laughing in his face.
"A fountain," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "You tell Carter I appreciate the offer, and you can tell him I'll be at the meeting. I've registered to speak." The color drained from the mayor's face.
He hadn't expected that. He mumbled something about the wood glue, turned, and practically fled from the store.
The first crack in their armor. The big move came the day before the meeting. I was closing up for the evening when a long black sedan, the kind that looks like it's designed to glide silently through city traffic,
Ames pulled up in front of the store. The driver's side door opened, and Carter stepped out.
He was dressed down, in expensive jeans and a cashmere sweater, an obvious attempt to look like a man of the people.
It didn't work. He looked like a wolf in sheep's clothing.
He strolled towards me, his hands in his pockets,
That same condescending smirk on his face.
My ex-wife, Melissa, was in the passenger seat.
She didn't get out. She just stared straight ahead, a marble statue of discomfort.
"Greg," Carter said, his voice smooth as silk. "Good to see you."
The old place looks rustic. It's a hardware store, Carter. It's supposed to, I replied, leaning against the doorframe, making it clear he wasn't welcome inside.
"Right," he said, with a little chuckle. "Listen, I hear you're planning on speaking tomorrow night. I just wanted to clear the air. I know this might seem personal with Melissa and me, and the park having your family name. But I want you to know, it's not. This is just good business. It's about progress. Your progress looks a lot like destruction to me," I said calmly. His smile tightened. The mask was slipping. "Look, let's not be sentimental. It's an underutilized piece of land. I'm going to turn it into a vibrant commercial hub that will benefit everyone. I'm offering you a chance to be on the right side of history here." He gestured back at my store. "This town is dying, Greg. I'm the defibrillator. You can either help me or you can get out of the way." Then came the pitch. "I'll tell you what, I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer for this building, way above market value. You can take the money, move somewhere sunny, and forget all about this place."
He thought he could buy me. He thought everyone had a price. That was his philosophy, the one that had won him my wife and was now, he assumed, going to win him my town. I looked past him, at Melissa in the car. She finally turned and our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I saw a flicker of something in her expression, shame maybe or regret, before she looked away. I turned my attention back to Carter. I let the silence stretch out, enjoying the flicker of irritation in his eyes. "Some things aren't for sale, Carter," I said, my voice quiet but firm. His smirk vanished completely, replaced by a cold glare. "That's a mistake, Greg. You're letting personal feelings cloud your judgment. Don't stand in the way of progress. You won't like the result." It was a threat, plain and simple. "I guess we'll find out tomorrow night," I said. He stared at me for a moment longer, his jaw tight with anger. Then he turned on his heel, got back into his silent, expensive car, and drove away. The panic was setting in. He didn't know what my plan was, but he knew I had one. He had tried to buy me, and he had tried to threaten me. Both had failed. The silent hardware store owner was no longer silent, and he was completely, utterly baffled. He was a man who understood only leverage and money, and I had just shown him that I didn't respond to either. The stage was set. The town hall was packed. Every seat was filled, and people were standing along the back and side walls. The air was thick with a mixture of anticipation, curiosity, and the faint scent of stale coffee. I saw faces I recognized from every part of my life. Old teachers, former classmates, customers from the store, people I hadn't spoken to in years. The entire town, it seemed, had turned out to witness the coronation of Carter. He sat at a table at the front of the room, next to the mayor and the rest of the town council, looking smug and confident. He'd recovered from our encounter. He thought my defiance was just the last gasp of a bitter man. He caught my eye as I walked in and gave me a small dismissive nod, as if to say, "Enjoy your little speech. It won't change a thing." I found a seat near the back next to Dave. He gave me a reassuring nod, a thick legal-looking binder resting on his lap. "Full house," he muttered under his breath. "They love a public execution." "Whose execution?" I whispered back. "Depends on how well you read your lines," he said with a grim smile. The meeting began with the usual procedural nonsense. Mayor Thompson droned on about the agenda, his voice trembling slightly whenever he glanced in my direction. Then he introduced Carter with a fawning tribute that made me feel physically ill, calling him a visionary and a savior of our town's economy. Carter strode to the podium. He was a master performer. He spoke with passion and charisma, painting a picture of a gleaming future. He unfurled architectural renderings of the Harmony Creek Plaza, a beige and glass monstrosity that looked like every other strip mall in America. He talked about the 150 construction jobs and the 75 permanent retail positions. He promised a new tax base that would fund new school books and repair the roads. He was slick, professional, and convincing. As he spoke, I could feel the mood in the room shifting. People were nodding. I heard murmurs of approval. He was selling them a seductive dream, and they were buying it. He was offering them a simple solution to complex problems, and he was doing it with a $1 million smile.
The room erupted in applause. My stomach sank.
He had them. He had completely won them over.
The council members were beaming, basking in his reflected glory. This was the family exodus I had feared. Not of blood relatives, but of my own townspeople. They were abandoning their history, their shared heritage, for the promise of a shiny new toy. They were siding with the outsider, the predator, against one of their own. Then it was time for public comment. A few people got up to sing Carter's praises. One woman, a council member's wife, gushed about the high-end coffee shop that was slated to open. The tide of support for Carter felt overwhelming, an unstoppable wave. The mayor, looking relieved that things were going so smoothly, finally called my name. "Next we have Greg Miller." A hush fell over the room. Every head turned to look at me as I made my way to the podium. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on me, most of them filled with pity or annoyance. I was the ghost at the feast, the man who was about to make a futile, sentimental plea that would only delay the inevitable. I placed my simple handwritten notes on the podium, my hands surprisingly steady. I looked out at the crowd, at the faces of my neighbors. Then I looked at Carter. He was leaning back in his chair, a bored expression on his face, already mentally counting his money. That's when Carter made his mistake. He decided to turn the knife one last time. He leaned into his microphone. "Before Mr. Miller begins," he said, his voice oozing condescension, "I'd just like to say that I have the utmost respect for his family's history. But as I'm sure my wife Melissa would agree, sometimes you have to let go of the past to build a better future." He gestured vaguely to where Melissa was sitting in the front row. All eyes swung to her. It was a cruel, manipulative move, designed to publicly align her with him and isolate me completely. She looked like a deer in the headlights, her face pale. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. She just gave a weak, almost imperceptible nod and shrank back in her seat. The counter-manipulation was clumsy, but effective. He'd used her as a shield, but he had miscalculated. He thought he was shaming me. Instead, he had lit a fire. He had shown everyone in that room exactly who he was, a bully who would use anyone, even his own wife, as a pawn in his game. I saw the expressions on some of the faces in the crowd flicker. A few of the women looked at Melissa with sympathy. A few of the older men looked at Carter with a new dawning distaste. He hadn't just insulted me. He had violated the unspoken rules of small-town decency. He had brought a private, painful history onto a public stage for his own gain. The exodus of support he thought he'd secured began to stall. A few people were starting to drift back to my shore, and I hadn't even said a word yet. I took a deep breath, leaned into the microphone, and began to speak. My voice was quiet, but in the suddenly silent room, it carried to every corner. "My name is Greg Miller," I started, my eyes sweeping across the room before landing on Carter. "And Mr. Carter is right about one thing. I am a man of the past. My family has been a part of this town's past for over a century. This hardware store, this park, they are my past. And I've come to realize that the past is not something you let go of. It's something you stand on." I paused, letting the words sink in. The room was utterly still. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't pleading. I was just talking. "Mr. Carter talks about progress and the future," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "He shows you glossy pictures of a plaza that could be anywhere in America. He promises you jobs at stores that will send their profits to a corporate headquarters 1,000 miles away. He calls this a vision. But a vision that requires you to erase your own history is not a vision, it's a surrender." Murmurs started to ripple through the crowd. People were leaning forward, listening intently. The pity in their eyes was being replaced by something else. Curiosity, and maybe even a flicker of pride. "This isn't just about a plot of land," I said, my gaze locking with Mayor Thompson's, who was now looking distinctly green. "This is about who we are. Are we a town that sells its soul for a new coffee shop? Are we a community that paves over the graves of its founders for a parking lot? Or are we a people who understand that some things have a value that can't be calculated on a balance sheet? Some things are not for sale." The phrase hung in the air, a direct echo of my conversation with Carter. He stiffened in his chair, his mask of bored confidence finally cracking. He knew where this was going. He just didn't know how. "Mr. Carter and the council believe this is a done deal," I said, my voice rising with conviction. "They believe the transient whims of temporary governance give them the right to undo a permanent gift." I saw a look of confusion on the mayor's face. He didn't understand the phrase. But I wasn't talking to him anymore. I was talking to the whole town. "What they've forgotten," I said, reaching into my jacket pocket, "is that the foundation of this town was built by men with foresight. Men who believed in protecting their legacy. Men like my great-grandfather, Thomas Miller." I pulled out the certified copy of the charter that Dave had prepared. I held it up for everyone to see. "This," I announced, my voice ringing with authority, "is a copy of the original town charter of Harmony Creek, and it contains a clause, a legacy clause, written and signed by the founders to protect this town's public lands from this exact kind of predatory development." A collective gasp went through the room. Carter shot out of his chair. "This is absurd," he yelled, his voice a panicked bark. "You can't be serious."
Yeah.
"That's a historical artifact, not a legal document." "On the contrary, Mr. Carter," a new voice boomed from the back of the room. Dave stood up, holding his binder. "As a member of the State Bar, I can assure you and the council that a town charter is the supreme legal document governing a municipality. And the clause in question is ironclad. I have the case law to prove it right here." He tapped the binder. I'd be happy to share it with the town's legal counsel. Assuming they still have one after you lead them into this mess. Carter's face went from red to a pasty white. He looked at the mayor, his eyes blazing with fury. Do something, he hissed. The mayor looked like he was about to faint. He just stammered, speechless. The power in the room had shifted completely. It was no longer at the front table with the men in suits. It was here at this podium. With me. I looked back out at the crowd, at my town. They were staring at me now with a mixture of shock, awe, and dawning, fierce pride. I was no longer the sad, quiet guy from the hardware store. I was a Miller, and I was taking my town back. I unfolded the paper and read the clause aloud, my voice clear and steady. The ultimate disposition, alteration, or sale of said lands shall be subject to a final, irrevocable veto by the gifting signatory or their direct, uncontested blood descendants, in perpetuity. I refolded the paper and looked directly at Carter, whose face was a mask of pure impotent rage. As the last direct, uncontested blood descendant of Thomas Miller, I declared. My voice resonating with the weight of a century of history. I exercise my right under this charter. I veto the proposal to demolish Miller Park. This project is dead. For a moment there was absolute silence, the kind of stunned silence that follows a lightning strike. Then the room exploded. It wasn't just applause, it was a roar, a wave of cathartic, joyful noise. People were on their feet, clapping, cheering, whistling. Old Man Gable, whose family had founded the town alongside mine, was pounding his neighbor on the back, tears of laughter in his eyes. The council members looked like they had been poleaxed. Carter stood there, frozen, his billion-dollar empire brought to a screeching halt by a piece of paper and a man he had dismissed as a relic of the past. The new reality was crashing down around him, and it was a reality he couldn't buy, bully, or bulldoze his way through. I had won. We had won. The past had reached out and saved the future. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The town hall meeting ended in chaos for Carter and the council, but for the rest of us, it was a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. Carter stormed out of the hall, shoving past a local reporter who tried to ask him a question, his face a thunderous mask of fury. Melissa trailed behind him, looking small and lost, avoiding the dozens of eyes that were now on her, not with pity, but with a kind of clinical curiosity. The power couple of Harmony Creek had been publicly dismantled. The council meeting was adjourned without a vote. There was nothing to vote on. The project was legally, unequivocally dead. Mayor Thompson, looking about 10 years older than he had an hour earlier, refused to comment, scurrying away to his car. Dave, meanwhile, was holding court with the press, calmly and expertly explaining the legal solidity of our position, handing out copies of his legal brief like party favors. I slipped out a side door, not wanting to be the center of attention. But the town found me anyway. As I walked down the street towards my store, people started coming out of their houses. They'd been watching the meeting on the local cable access channel. A car driving by honked its horn, and the driver gave me a thumbs up. Mrs. Gable, the matriarch of the town's other founding family, stopped me on the sidewalk, took both my hands in hers, and said, "Your great-grandfather would be so proud, Gregory." The knot of loneliness I'd carried inside me for 2 years finally, completely, dissolved. I wasn't an outsider anymore. I was home. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Carter's entire empire in Harmony Creek began to crumble. With his flagship project annihilated, the bank that had financed his other ventures got nervous. The investigative journalist Dave had sicked on him, published a scathing exposé on Carter's predatory business practices in other small towns, revealing a pattern of broken promises, lawsuits, and shady dealings. The town council, in a desperate act of self-preservation, launched a formal review of all of Carter's existing permits and contracts. They found irregularities, of course. Men like Carter always cut corners. His whole house of cards came tumbling down. He was forced to sell his properties at a loss, just to cover his debts. I heard through the town gossip mill that he and Melissa left town in the middle of the night. Their half-finished mansion on the hill went into foreclosure. There was a grim satisfaction in it. I won't deny it. But it wasn't the victory that mattered most. My real vindication wasn't in his failure, but in our success. The weekend after the meeting, a spontaneous event happened. Someone posted on the town's Facebook page, "Let's go clean up our park." That Saturday, hundreds of people showed up at Miller Park. They brought rakes, garbage bags, lawnmowers and work gloves. I loaded up my old pickup truck with tools from the store, loppers, saws, shovels, and gave them out to anyone who needed them. We worked all day, side by side. We cleared brush, painted the old benches, planted new flowers around the base of the council oak. It was a barn raising, a community coming together not just to clean a park, but to reclaim its own identity. At the end of the day, someone started a barbecue, and we all sat on the grass, sharing food and stories. As the sun set, the way people in this town used to. My life found a new rhythm. The hardware store was busier than ever. People didn't just come in for screws and paint anymore. They came in to talk, to ask my opinion, to thank me. I was no longer Greg Miller, the sad divorcee. I was Greg Miller, the man who saved the park. I had inadvertently become a town leader, and I found, to my surprise, that I liked it. Dave and I helped form a new Citizens Historical Preservation Committee. Our job was to work with the chastened town council to ensure that any future development would honor the town's character, not destroy it. The veto power of the legacy clause was my tool, but I made it clear it was a tool for the whole town, a shield to be used only to protect our shared heritage. It wasn't about power, it was about stewardship. I never did hear from Melissa. A part of me was curious, but a much larger part of me was relieved. Her chapter in my life was over. My revenge, if you can call it that, wasn't about hurting her or destroying Carter. It was about rebuilding myself. It was about discovering that the quiet, rustic life Carter had so viciously mocked was actually richer and more meaningful than anything his world of money and power could ever offer. My vindication was the sound of children laughing in Miller Park. It was the smell of fresh-cut grass. It was the feeling of belonging, of being a part of something real and lasting. Carter had tried to pave over my past, and in doing so, he had forced me to unearth a strength I never knew I had. He had wanted to build a soulless monument to his own ego, but instead, he had helped the town of Harmony Creek remember its soul, and he had helped me find mine. So here I am, standing in the middle of Miller Park on a perfect summer evening. The new flower beds are in full bloom, and the old council oak looks more majestic than ever. A group of kids is playing baseball on the lawn, their shouts and laughter echoing in the twilight. It's funny how things turn out. I came back to Harmony Creek to hide from the world, to lick my wounds in private. I thought my story was over, but it turns out, it was just the beginning of a new chapter. I learned something powerful through all of this. I learned that our past isn't a prison, it's a foundation. The world is full of Carters, people who will tell you that progress means erasing what came before, that new is always better than old, and that everything and everyone has a price. They'll try to make you feel small for valuing history, for cherishing tradition, for wanting to preserve something just for the sake of its beauty and its story. Don't let them. Your legacy, whether it's a family business, a community park, or just the values passed down to you, is a source of incredible strength. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is to stand up and say, no, this matters. This is part of who we are, and it is not for sale. You might feel like you're standing alone against a tidal wave, but you'd be surprised how many people are standing right behind you, waiting for someone to show them that it's okay to fight for the things that money can't buy. My story had a happy ending for me and my town, but it was a close call. It took a forgotten clause in a 100-year-old document to save us. It shouldn't have to be that dramatic. All it should take is people deciding that their home is worth more than a developer's bottom line. So what do you think? Was I right to use such an old obscure rule to block the project, or should the town have been allowed to vote for what they thought was progress? Did I go too far by waiting until the last minute to reveal my hand, or was it the only way to win? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found my story compelling, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories about people fighting back and finding justice in the most unexpected ways. Thanks for listening.